Hello, Bond fans, and welcome once again. So, I've frequently talked in these videos about how the 1960s were very much the peak of Bond mania, and I think there's no better example of that than the fact that Thunderball was a gargantuan box office success.
Whatever my own personal feelings about Thunderball may be, the movie was insanely popular at the time and remained the highest-grossing Bond film when adjusted for inflation until 2012's Skyfall. It must have been a daunting task for the filmmakers to come to the next film in the series, knowing that they had to, if not at least equal, then top the success of the previous film.
Their answer was apparently to go bigger, but does that necessarily equate to better? Well, that's what we're going to be looking at today as we take a look at the fifth big-screen James Bond adventure, You Only Live Twice.
The film begins with the same Connery gun barrel sequence as Thunderball, and then we open in outer space to see an American spacecraft swallowed by an unidentified spacecraft. Of course, the Americans blame the Russians, but fortunately good old Blighty is there to maintain calm due to intelligence that the unidentified shuttle landed somewhere in the Sea of Japan, and they reassure both sides by saying that their best man is on the case. And of course he's in bed with a dame. So Bond is fake killed in this sequence, but exactly who is in on this whole faking death thing is something of a mystery. I mean, if Bond, Ling, the two guys with guns, and the guy who checks Bond's pulse are all in on the same plan, then why bother going through the hassle of the bed and having shots fired at Bond? Or do they not know? I mean, the guy who checked his pulse must have, or was that some kind of pulse-stopping Q-branch device involved? And what exactly were those guys with machine guns doing while waiting for their cue? Were they just listening in on Bond and Ling bonking?
Can I also just divert to have a little bit of a rant about how much I hate it when these early James Bond films play the "we're gonna kill Bond off in the first few minutes of the film" charade?
Let's see, I mean, there's the guy in From Russia With Love in the pre-credit sequence there, the JB initials on the coffin in Thunderball, and now in You Only Live Twice. And, well, it's just tiresome. Obviously, Bond isn't going to be dead. There wouldn't be a film if Bond died in the first few minutes. I think the only time that this has ever actually been successfully done is in Skyfall, purely because it was more of a metaphorical, symbolic thing. No audience member is seriously going to believe that Bond is dead in the first 10 minutes of the film. Anyway, after some lovely opening titles, we see Bond's fake burial at sea, which begs the question exactly what Bond has been doing for the past couple of days or hours. I mean, was he playing dead all this time, just hanging out in the morgue?
To be honest, by the time we get into the film, I forget that this faking death thing even happened, apart from justifying the title of the film, of course. It's not as if Spectre would have really changed anything about their plan or done anything differently if they knew that Bond was dead or alive. I mean, they start their plan before they think he's dead, so
I've also always been curious about this mustachioed man watching Bond's fake funeral through binoculars. We've never see him again, but I've always wondered if the intention is that he's supposed to be a Spectre agent, and maybe in an earlier draft of the screenplay he had a part later on in the film. It would have been cooler if this was one of the guys who was, in the volcano lair at the end of the film, but whatever. Bond is picked up, and it quickly becomes apparent that Connery was not going to bother acting this film around. It's very well documented that Connery was really pissed off with his role as Bond around this time due to pay disputes and not feeling like he had any privacy anymore.
But boy, for all of Thunderball's faults, at least you could count on Connery to bring warmth, charm and charisma to the screen whenever he was on. None of that can be found here, and I think that's really evident in these Moneypenny scenes.
Oh, by the way, how was the girl?
Which girl?
The Chinese one we fixed you up with.
Oh, another 5 minutes, I'd have found out.
These are so often a highlight of the Connery era. His chemistry with Lois Maxwell is normally perfect, but here, the spark has completely gone. I do find it kind of fascinating that the man can obviously turn charm on and off like a faucet. We have the briefing scene with M in a really cool and funny set. It's the usual office, but on a submarine, and we'll see similar setups in future Bond films where M has apparent offices all over the place, including pyramids. I love that he always often has a whole full shelf load of books behind him. It's like every time he goes into the field, he will take that crate of office books with him. After a fun little scene with Moneypenny, Bond meets Japanese contact Aki, played by Akiko Wakabayashi, at a sumo wrestling match.
I must say, watching this sequence with a modern perspective is really interesting. It's such a product of its time.
I can't imagine many people in the 60s would have ever seen a sumo wrestling match before, and this was probably quite a cool thing to see. Heck, it's cool even now. It's just cool seeing a part of the world at a certain point in time captured on film like this.
I didn't really appreciate this much when I was a kid and sort of getting into the series, but now that I'm a bit more grown up, this whole Bond travelogue stuff really appeals to me.
After a bit of the match, Aki takes Bond to meet his contact in Japan, Dicko Henderson, played by Charles...
Jump to the left.
Gray. We have quite a charming dialogue sequence between the two actors before Dicko is killed in a really effective scene. He just stops talking mid-sentence. It's really creepy. I'm so glad this scene wasn't played for laughs or anything. Though it is kind of disappointing that Henderson is out of the film so early. I really like that guy. Anyway, Bond kills the assailant and dons his pollution mask thingamabob in the first of 2 attempts Bond makes this film to impersonate a Japanese man. You're about 2 foot taller and groaning in a Scottish accent, but okay, get in. Bond is taken to Osato Chemicals, where he breaks into a safe, steals some documents, and triggers an alarm, but luckily Aki is nearby and comes to the rescue. Aki starts acting all weird and suspicious and stuff in the obligatory way that Bond's allies often do at the start of every film, and Bond ends up chasing her about a bit when he falls through a trapdoor onto a slide and into the office of Tiger Tanaka. Despite the initial Blofeld bluff, Tanaka, played by Tetsuro Tamba, is a good guy. How do we know this? Well...
If you're Tanaka, how do you feel about me?
I love you.
Oh, Mr. Bond.
Tanaka takes Bond to his private subway train, and there's a really nice little exchange here that I think is really great.
Very convenient.
I imagine that your Mr. M in London has a similar arrangement.
Oh yes, but of course.
I love that in that moment Bond is like, oh right, yeah, rather than like, are you kidding? The MI6 budget can barely stretch as much to pay the legal costs of my sexual harassment cases, never mind paying for a personal train. And I guess it shows that Bond is actually willing to save face for his boss. It's just a little moment and it's a quick thing, but I find it interesting.
Bond, along with Tanaka, examines the stolen documents, picking up a few clues before heading to the Japanese version of the Playboy Mansion and taking baths in something of an awkward scene, but a necessary scene nonetheless to show Bond and Tanaka, well, bonding, I suppose, and indeed I think Tanaka becomes one of Bond's most cherished allies in this scene. There's certainly not the warmth that was present between Bond and Kerim Bey in From Russia with Love, but Tanaka's a really cool guy, and I'm happy that Tetsuro Tamba's real voice gets to sneak in a bit here when he speaks some Japanese. The pair separate for massages when Aki shows up and is more than a little affectionate with Bond.
Aki.
No one will disturb you tonight.
It's like, sorry, did I miss something? I mean, when did you two suddenly form this great bond of friendship? I mean, what is it? Maybe it's how Connery plays it, because he's so like, oh, Aki, how have you been, lass? It's been years. I mean, it's like, you know, how many hours have they known of each other's existence? It's like, you know, oh yes, those, you know, a little bit of a sumo match, 2 car rides, and a chase around some corridors, and that's all it takes to form a great friendship in those days. It's like, oh, hi, how have you been? Yeah, I chased you through that tunnel last week. Do you not remember? It's always a moment that's really puzzled me.
I think I will enjoy very much serving under you.
Anyway, the next day, Bond visits Osato Chemicals using an alias and meets Osato himself, played by Teru Shimada, and his secretary, Helga Brandt, played by Karen Dorr. Osato uses various machines to suss Bond out as a secret agent before giving him some friendly advice.
You should give up smoking. Cigarettes are very bad for your chest.
Mr. Osato believes in a healthy chest.
What? Okay. Well, this was the 60s. I thought it was okay to smoke, in this time.
Yeah, this from the guy who serves champagne during morning meetings. Anyway, Asato gives the order to have Bond killed, and a few attempts are made, including the slowest attempted drive-by shooting in history, and a very drawn-out sequence in which a giant magnet picks up the villain's car and drops it in the sea. I'm not saying that this isn't an impressive feat, an impressive stunt. It's just a sequence that goes on a couple of minutes too long for my liking. I can only assume it was so expensive to create the scene that the filmmakers really wanted to milk the footage they got out of it. Bond and Aki investigate the Kobe docks to find the ship from the photograph from earlier, and we have a wonderful action sequence around this point. It's not big or flashy, but I just love it when Bond gets to the roof, and we get a helicopter shot of him racing around the roof, tackling everyone.
Director Lewis Gilbert said it was a deliberate attempt to vary up the fight sequences. You know, so many fight scenes, you know, quick cuts, quick flashes of a punch or a kick or whatever, and I think it was actually a genius move on his part.
Bond is eventually captured by Helga, whom he attempts to seduce, obviously not learning from his mistakes with Fiona in the last installment. Indeed, Helga is very much just Fiona Volpe again, and I'm surprised that the filmmakers sought to replicate that exact character just one film later.
But I love Helga all the same. I've got a real thing for femme fatales, and when you think about it, she is like the last prominent femme fatale we have in a Bond film until Xenia in 1995. I'm not sure that Blofeld in drag really counts as a femme fatale.
Helga tries to kill Bond in a plane crash because, you know, shooting him would be way too easy. Bond escapes, of course, but really the fault here is with him. I mean, from the moment they set off, Helga has her parachuting gear on, and unless your eyes were gouged out by stone thumbnailed henchmen, I can't imagine why it wouldn't occur to someone that maybe Helga had no desire to actually land this plane. Bond heads back to Tanaka's, where our hero decides he's going to survey the nearby area from the sky. Q branch.
Look, 007, I've had a long and tiring journey, probably to no purpose, and I'm in no mood for your juvenile quips.
After the diabolically bad Q-branch scene from Thunderball, I'm happy to say that this one is a good return to form with some nice lines and Bond not behaving like a juvenile 12-year-old. Anyway, we're introduced to a fan favourite auto-gyro here, Little Nelly, which is just an absolute marvel of an invention. Before we see Bond take off and kick some Spectre ass in this thing, we're totally with Tiger. This thing looks like the kind of kiddie rides you put 50p in the front of supermarkets that bob up and down, but once the action starts, Little Nelly is a force to be reckoned with.
The whole aerial action battle sequence is, dare I say, the finest aerial battle sequence in the entire Bond canon, and, you know, I love how we have the classic Monty Norman theme blaring over the whole thing. It's a wonderful sequence.
Meanwhile, a Russian spacecraft sets off, clearly not in Russia obviously, thanks to the appearance of 2 palm trees at the launch site. The craft is promptly swallowed, but this time we follow the unidentified craft back down to Earth, where it lands inside a volcano, where we have one of the most impressive sets ever built in the history of cinema.
Just to go on a little tangent here, Ken Adams must be one of the most underrated cinematic geniuses in history. I mean, this film is a great showcase for his talent. I mean, his amazing work on this film series not only set the style for the Bond film series, but it set an entire decade of style of, you know, the 60s spy genre. I mean, nowadays if you see a parody of a spy movie, chances are it'll have a set inspired by a work of Ken Adam. I would argue that his contribution to the Bond film series could be even greater than some of the writers and directors in these early films. I mean, for God's sake, the volcano has a frigging working monorail.
The astronauts are taken captive, and we see the whole Spectre motley crew is here, including an unseen Blofeld stroking his white cat. By the way, I love how on the HD transfers of this film you can see the fabric on Blofeld's jacket that has been so clearly clawed at by the cat, but we'll come to the actual traumatizing of this poor pussy later. We also see Blofeld has a pool of piranhas with a flimsy-looking walkway over it.
Yeah, I'm sure no one's going to get dropped in there for failing to kill Bond, are they? No, they're just there for show. Just there for show.
Blofeld gives Osato and Helga a chewing out after figuring out that Bond is alive, because only he uses a wall for PPK. Yeah, just going back to what I talked about earlier, Bond's fake death at the start of the movie really doesn't do anything with regards to the plot. The excuse they give for even having him fake his death is, well, at least Spectre's not on your tail anymore, but it's such a poor explanation, and they really didn't have to write it that way. Anyway, Helga is dispatched off much too soon for failing to kill Bond, who, meanwhile, returns to Tanaka, who suggests that if Bond wants a closer look at the volcano, he should disguise himself as a Japanese fisherman and train with his ninja squad.
This is my ninja training school.
Top secret when they make noises like that? Jesus Christ, I thought the whole point of being a ninja was that you weren't supposed to know they were there! There wouldn't be much of a surprise if this lot was going around, would they? Jesus Christ!
Tanaka equips Bond with his own gadget of a rocket-firing cigarette before it's decided that Bond fake marry one of Tanaka's agents. I mean, God, fake death, fake marriage, is Bond gonna do anything for real in this movie? Well, I mean, admittedly, he for real goes fake Japanese, which leads to hilarity.
Gombawa.
Konbanwa.
Yeah, this is probably one of the most unconvincing makeup jobs in all of cinema. There is no way that anyone would ever mistake this man for a Japanese fisherman. I mean, he's 6'2" and speaks Japanese with a Scottish accent.
I don't know whether Connery just couldn't be bothered with arduous makeup, so they just came up with the easiest thing that they could, or maybe his face is just incapable of looking anything but Scottish, but, wow. That night, Aki is killed, and, well, everyone seems to get over it rather quickly, as it's back to training the next day when an assassination attempt is made on Bond.
You killed him.
Yeah, he tried to kill me.
Yeah, he started it.
This man is a stranger from outside.
It's a good job I've memorized every face of every student in this school in order to make that call. To complete his cover as a Japanese fisherman, a fake marriage is staged with one of Tanaka's students, Kissy Suzuki, played by Mie Hama. Now, nothing against Hama, but the fact that they kill off Aki in order to bring in this new girl is so ridiculous from an ease of storytelling standpoint. It was a blatant attempt to shoehorn another girl into the movie for the sake of publicity purposes, as at this stage in the film series, Bond needed a minimum of 3 girls, plus Moneypenny, in every film.
Heck, he has 4 in this movie alone, including Ling from the start. Jeez, and that's not including any of the girls at Tanaka's bathhouse that he inevitably will have slept with.
There's a long drawn-out fake wedding scene over some lovely John Barry music, so here's some moderately interesting trivia for you. Mie Hama was originally supposed to play Aki, and Akiko Wakabayashi was to play Kissy, but Hama wasn't quite learning English quick enough, so the producers were going to fire her when she told them that if they did that, she'd throw herself off of the roof of the Dorchester Hotel, so the producers did the decent thing and kept her in the film, but switched her role with Wakabayashi, so Wakabayashi ended up playing Aki, who is in the film more and clearly the more talky part, while Kissy has fewer lines, but is effectively the main Bond girl, or at least she's the one that Bond sleeps with at the end of the film, despite probably audiences at the time not knowing what her name was, as the film never actually tells us Kissy's name, which is quite bizarre. But anyway, with the marriage over, Bond and Kissy head to the volcano island to keep up appearances as a newlywed Japanese couple.
Wow, convincing.
Bond and Kissy investigate some local caves, encountering a poison gas in one of them, so go for a swim to escape it, which I think we're supposed to believe washes off Bond's Japanese man makeup as it disappears for the entire final third of the film. Anyway, the pair do some hiking, and we have some absolutely gorgeous scenic photography to take in before some awkwardly edited flirting between Bond and Kissy takes place.
It's hard work.
Some honeymoon.
to discover the volcano base, and Bond slips in, having miraculously changed outfits somehow, despite him clearly not taking anything with him, nor having anything extra on under his Japanese fisherman guise, but whatever. He finds and rescues the missing astronauts and dons a spacesuit, and OMFG, it looks like Bond is gonna go into outer space.
I really like that Bond is actually willing to go ahead with this, despite him having just rescued 3 men who were, severely more qualified to fly this spacecraft than he is. But he's like, yeah, go on then, I'll do it. I mean, how hard can it be? Switches, just flick one.
Yeah, excuse me, that's our oxygen. We sort of need that. When Blofeld spots Bond mishandling his air conditioner, he knows that something is up. He's a smart one, that Blofeld, and the launch is stalled. And after 3 films of waiting, it's finally here, folks. Blofeld reveals himself to the audience.
I am Ernst Stavro Blofeld. They told me you were assassinated in Hong Kong.
Yes, this is my second life.
You only live twice, Mr. Bond.
I've waxed lyrical about Donald Pleasance already in my Blofeld ranking video, so I'm not gonna, harp on too much about him here, but just to say that I really wish that I could have been in the audience. With an audience seeing this film for the first time in the 1960s, just to see what the reaction would have been to this. It's such a creepy and menacing shot with him, revealed looking right down the camera lens. It's such an amazing reveal.
The only thing that bothers me about this reveal is that it's effectively from behind another guy's crotch, but I just adore Connery's reaction here. It's so subtle, but probably his best bit of acting in the whole film. He's kind of suspicious, intrigued, doesn't really know what to make of what he's seeing, and it's all conveyed in a couple of seconds. I just love this scene. It also serves to allow Blofeld to exposit more about his dastardly plan to inaugurate a little war between the US and the USSR. It's a really great scheme and a classic Bond villain setup. I also love that after the shuttle finally sets off, Blofeld is like, yeah, so Hans, when the American shuttle is taken, hit this switch and blow up both ships. I can't imagine those astronauts knew that that was part of the job description.
Maybe it's for the best that Bond had no idea how to handle his air conditioner.
Meanwhile, Kissy leads Tanaka's troops to the base, but they're fired at by the sentry guns and can't get in when 007 makes his last request.
What if I'm going to be forced to watch television? May I smoke?
Yes, give him his cigarettes. It won't be the nicotine that kills you, Mr. Bond.
All right, then I'll quit.
Bond uses the rocket-laden cigarette to blast his way to the controls, where he opens the hatch, letting the ninjas in, and a frigging huge battle ensues. It's awesome, and makes great use of the gargantuan set, providing us with lots of cool explosions and action and ninja moves. This is how a climactic movie battle should be. It's just so epic. Eventually, Blofeld's tower is breached by the ninjas.
Impregnable?
Gee, that cat looks pretty distressed. Anyone gonna call cut? No? Alright, we're just gonna let it shit itself then, okay.
Yeah, when you listen to the audio commentary on the DVD, Assistant Director William Cartledge talks a little bit about how traumatised this cat was from the experience. So traumatised that its owner threatened to sue the production company because the cat could no longer go anywhere near a film set, and when the cat's main job is to go and film, cat food adverts and whatever, that's something of a problem. When they say no animals were harmed during the making of this film, does that include psychological harm as well?
The control room is evacuated and Blofeld kills Asato. The cat vanishes after a couple of cuts, probably ran off to call its therapist, and it looks like Bond is about to be killed when Tanaka comes to the rescue and Bond is finally able to join the battle. He fights his way past Hans, who becomes Piranha Chow, and makes it to the control room to blow up the Spectre spaceship. Blofeld, presumably pissed off that he now has no cat, blows up the base, causing the volcano to erupt, and Bond, Tanaka, Kissy, and the surviving ninjas all flee to airdropped lifeboats. Bond and Kissy getting one all to themselves, of course, because Bond needs his sex raft.
It's a bit of a shame we don't get one last decent final scene with Tanaka too. I mean, I really loved that character. I thought he was really cool, and I think it's a shame that we don't at least get a decent goodbye with him.
Bond and Kissy start getting all jiggy with it on the lifeboat when they're interrupted by M's submarine.
Tell him to come below and report.
It'll be a pleasure, sir.
Come below. Is that Is that intended as innuendo? Well, anyway, that's the end of the movie. Back to Nancy Sinatra to sing us out with one of the very best Bond themes.
So I really like and enjoy And Live Twice. I think it accomplishes everything it sets out to do, primarily being to entertain and excite the viewer.
I think changing directors again was a good thing. Lewis Gilbert, on paper at least, was certainly an odd choice for a big-budget action spectacle of a movie like this, but along with Goldfinger, I think You Only Live Twice is a Bond movie blueprint. It's just as classic as Goldfinger, if not quite as good. The size and scale of the film is astounding, and I hate to be kissing Ken Adams' arse all the time in these videos, but the man is a god of production design. The volcano set has really stood the test of time, and I can't think of another set in a Bond film that wasn't designed by Adams that comes close to besting this. It's really something special. The supporting cast of the film are terrific, with Tetsuro Tamba and Karen Dor really standing out as Tiger and Helga respectively. The only bad thing about Helga is that, well, she was always just going to come across as a Fiona Volpe 2.0, but Karen plays the part with at least a semblance of sympathy. Fiona was never sympathetic in Thunderball, just a hoot to watch, but later in You Only Live Twice, you genuinely get the sense that Helga is terrified of Blofeld. In every scene she's in with him, there's just a look of unease and contained fear on her face, and even though she is a villain, you can't help but feel something for her when those piranhas are ripping her to shreds. It's, subtle acting by Karen, but it's definitely there. Akiko Wakabayashi and Mie Hama make for beautiful Bond girls, but, well, is there really a good reason why the characters couldn't have just simply been merged into one? Aki could have served the same function as Kissy, and it's not like she's even mourned at all, really. We don't have a funeral, no one seems to be deeply affected by Aki's death, so what was the point in killing her off at all? If I had to pick one of the girls as my favourite, though, it'd definitely be Kissy. Mie Hama is really gorgeous, and I don't know, there's just something about her face that I find more enigmatic, I guess, and she looks bloody wonderful in that bikini at the end. Donald Pleasance is a creepy and menacing Blofeld. I love Pleasance in almost every film I've seen him in. He's such a pro. I do feel sorry for that bloody cat, though, and what the hell happened to it anyway? It just kind of ran off and disappeared. I suppose we're to assume it died in the volcano. It's kind of a shame that the only real weak link in the cast is, well, Connery. I think this is by far his least good performance as Bond. He just looks bored and tired. There's none of the magic of his acting from Russia with Love or Goldfinger. I mean, it's understandable. I mean, he was pissed off that he was being constantly harassed by the press, and Connery is a very private man, so he probably couldn't wait for this shoot to be over. But in his defense, I mean, I will say that I think he does improve as the film goes on. I don't know what order the film was shot or anything like that, and it's not consistent, but there is some of that Connery sparkle again in the Spectre volcano base towards the end of the film. Even with Connery's lackluster performance, though, the film is incredibly entertaining, and yeah, it has some plot and story problems, but the gargantuan spectacle of the movie kind of overshadows that. I'm not saying it's one of the best films in the series, but it's a good episode nonetheless, and hey, it'll be remade, but better with The Spy Who Loved Me and Moonraker. I suppose I just love the setting of this movie, too. It's one of the less globe-trotting Bond adventures, really. I mean, we're in Japan, more or less, for the duration, but it's great seeing Bond in such a different landscape and culture. You Only Live Twice is the most beautifully photographed of all the Connery Bond movies. Cinematographer Freddie Young did Lawrence of Arabia, for Christ's sake. The caliber speaks for itself. You could just turn off the sound and this Bond movie would still be a joy to view.
Of Connery's 3 Bond swan songs, this is definitely the best, even if it's not necessarily his best performance. The film was a massive success, and it put the filmmakers in a really interesting position. The public had a salacious appetite for Bond, but they had no Bond himself.
Their philosophy was that Bond is bigger than any one man, but when that one man is Sean Connery, there's a hell of a long shadow for George Lazenby to step into. Does he succeed? Well, that's what we'll be looking at next time as we review On Her Majesty's Secret Service.